Good morning, students. If you remember the last class on research methodology, I said that the research quality of your research can be checked by four concepts: reliability, validity, generalizability, and ethical practice. So, ethical practice or following some ethical principles is very important to make your research, I mean, to do a quality research. So, if you want to be a quality researcher, then the following of ethical principles or the following of ethics is must. Basically, uh, following ethics basically for a researcher means the researcher must be truthful and honest, right? The researcher at any point of time should not practice dishonestly. The researcher should not tell any lie, right? Rather, the researcher uh, must, uh, what I will say, the researcher uh, must, I mean, put himself and his research under scrutiny, right? The researcher must not hide things. At the same time, the researcher must maintain the authenticity of the researcher. So once we will go through the ethical guidelines, ethical consideration, uh, one thing will be very clear: what the researcher must do and what the researcher must avoid. Now, thinking about ethics for a researcher means considering the social and moral values of the participants, which creates a mutually respectful relationship in which participants are pleased to respond and valid results are obtained. So basically, when the researcher collects data from the field, the researcher, takes the help of participants. Without participants, the researcher may not collect his data in the field. Now, a researcher, while following ethics, must consider the social and moral values of the participants. If you will not understand the social and moral values of the participants, then your participants cannot develop a respect towards you and you cannot be respectful towards your participants. And as a result, your participants may not respond you and in consequence valid results cannot be obtained, and community, I mean, if you develop or or if you give respect to the social and moral values of the participants, then the conclusion what you derive from your research, it is always constructive, it is always beneficial to the larger society or community. So you have to ask yourself this question: how you would want to be treated when you are invited to take part in someone else's project. I mean, what you should do with your participants and what you should not do with your participants. There is no fixed rule. It depends on your moral conscience. Hence, you must ask this question to yourself that if you would have been a respondent to someone's research, what would be your expectation? And accordingly, this self question this will push you towards ethical consideration. What are the ethical guidelines? I'm sorry for slight disturbance. So, this self questioning pushes a researcher towards the ethical consideration. And what are those ethical considerations? There are important considerations when you are thinking about research ethics. And these considerations are, informed consent, power relationship, protection from harm for participants, vulnerable group, ownership of data, cultural consideration, protection from harm for researcher, etc. So these are some of the important ethical consideration a researcher must follow. Right. What is this informed consent? It means, or this informed consent basically, it means taking the consent of your respondent by giving some information. This is called informed consent. So what you need to do now, you make sure that people who are going to take part in your research understand that why they are consenting to participate. It means you must give a clarification to your respondents why they must participate in your research. There are a number of things that a researcher must to make sure. And what are those things? First, the consent should be freely given. It means the researcher should not use any kind of power and influence over the respondents. Second, you must provide clear and adequate information to the respondents. For example, you must spell it out what is, I mean, what is in it for them. That means what is there in your research which is for them. The moment you explain it, then you are giving a kind of satisfaction to your respondents so that they will eagerly want, want to help you in your research. Sometimes you can also pay them for their participation. Second, why are you doing this research? Why are you doing this research? The moment you explain it, it will generate, I mean, why you are doing this research. The moment you explain it, the respondents will be free from any confusion, and the researcher will show interest to participate so that the researcher will find that at least there is no risk participating in your research. So the researcher must explain what is there in his research for them, why he is doing such a research, and third, participation must be voluntary, can be withdrawn at any point of time. Right. The researcher cannot impose a participant to participate in his research. You cannot say that, or you cannot say to your participant that once you are joining or once you are participating in my research, then you have to complete your participation. Now you cannot force your participant to do that. So make sure that if your participant withdraw at any point of time from your research, then what you will do to that data, I mean to that half data. So in your research design, you must have a plan when such a situation arises. Then you have to spell it out whether there is any risk to your participants in future. Then you have to say to your participant what you will do with the data that has been given by them, right? And this must be said to the participants, otherwise you are cheating them. I mean, the data that has been provided by your participants, you should not think that the data is yours, and you must spell it out. You must be truthful and honest when you are explaining to them what you are going to do with those data. Then you have to spell it out by what capacity, by what authority you are conducting this research. So basically, you have to tell your identity and you should not lie. Right. So these are the things. I mean, if you explain all these, questions, gives clarification on these points, then One can say that you are providing clear and adequate information to your participants. The moment you give all these clarification, then the respondents will be able to give their informed consent. Informed consent basically means in the beginning I said when the respondents gives their consent with full informations provided by the researcher. Right. So informed consent is an important consideration, ethical consideration for the researcher. The second ethical consideration for the researcher is power relation. Many times in the field, you will find the participants see the researcher as powerful, especially the researcher is seen as an expert on the research, right? Your respondents might not want to disagree with you. You may, in that context, lose the authenticity of the information. That means if you are perceived as an expert and you are conducting research, you are participating, you are engaging with your participants are giving some data to you. Many times it is seen that participants they hesitate to disagree with you because they think that you are the expert in that area. Now, in such a situation, you may lose the authenticity of the information. What does it mean? Why you will lose the authenticity of the information? It is because what you do not know, the respondents will not tell you. What you know, the respondents will only tell you or will only agree with you. So, thereby, the whole purpose of doing research, the whole purpose of engaging with the respondents becomes meaningless. Hence, we must, as a researcher, we must be careful to this consideration, power relation consideration. So we should, behave, we should talk in such a way that the respondents will not think you as powerful. The respondent will not think that you are the expert. The respondent will disagree with you. The respondent will give you more, authentic, information. So besides, you as a researcher need to deal with superior and inferior complexity to sustain the authenticity of the data. So it means the researcher should not have either superior complexity or inferior complexity because these two complexity, either superior or inferior, is always dangerous, is always a danger for maintaining and for sustaining the authenticity of the data. The next ethical consideration is protection from harm for participants. So let me take 1 minute break and come. Okay, coming back. So the next ethical consideration is protection from harm for participants. Since your research may harm people's existence, you need to be careful, you need to be conscious about it, right? Now, you need to avoid the physical and psychological harm. Now, physical harm can be avoided by making data collection place safe, right? Either you are going to your respondents or you are asking your respondents to call, to come to you. So you have to think about the safety of your respondents. You have to ensure the place you are asking your participants to come, whether that place is a safe place or not, right? So generally, participants are very reluctant to meet the researcher in a lonely place because they are afraid of you. They think that they are powerless person and you are powerful person. So you have to ensure the you know safety of the place uh, in which you are meeting with your participant and you are collecting data from them. So a place is safe when many people are invited to a place where there are lots of other people. So generally a participant always want to meet the researcher in a place where there are gatherings, many people. So you have to take care looking at the nature of your research, that how to give a sense of safety to your respondent so that your respondent will uh, will not think about any kind of harm, physical harm, right? And the psychological harm can also be avoided by making a context. What is this? Yes, 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 I got it. So the psychological harm, the researcher must be conscious about the psychological harm which the respondents may feel or may face, right, while uh, participating in your research, right? So it is the responsibility of the researcher to ensure the participants that they are not going to get psychological harm from your research, right? Suppose you are conducting a topic on rape and uh, you are interviewing individuals who have faced this rape. Now, when the victim of the rape is explaining, is saying something or saying his or her own experience to you, then as a researcher, you must be careful when you are asking any question to that rape victim because your question may psychologically harm to that person. So you should ask that person the question in such a way that that person will open up, that person will not get the psychological harm from you, that person will discuss any uncomfortable issues relating to the rape with you, and thereby you can collect many data I mean, what you have not expected, you may get many data from them in that situation. So basically, you have to take care the psychological risk. You have to take care the physical harm. I mean, the researcher must avoid the physical and psychological harm. We must ensure the respondents so that our respondents will not get any harm physically and psychologically. Besides this, the researcher must also take care uh, if the respondent is going to lose his job as a result of taking part in your research, right? So it is the responsibility of the researcher to think about it. Then your respondents need to be certain that the information will remain confidential or not, right? uh, I mean, respondents are always fearful about this question, that the information what they are providing to you, I mean, whether it will be in confidential or whether others are going to know it. If others are going to know it, then there is a life risk to them, right? And the respondents must understand the purpose of your research, right? So all these things are very important. The moment you ensure all these things, the researcher uh, they like they like to participate in your research, right? So regarding confidentiality, participants are assured that they will not be identified in the research. They must be maintained. They must be maintained that finding of research will disseminated so that they can take proper decision about participation. However, this may not be always possible. So what does it mean? I mean, you as a researcher must tell that you are doing this research for the sake of research, so that knowledge can be created, knowledge can be you know disseminated, right? One interesting thing, when I was doing research in Kandhamar, this this uh, ethical consideration, I knew that I must take all the information from them, but I will not disclose their name. Since I was doing research on religious conversion, uh, it would have been harmful to their life if I would have disclosed their name, who said what, right? But when I asked them that I am not going to disclose their name, I will maintain the confidentiality. Interestingly, the participants said that no, sir, we want our name to be there in your thesis so that let the people know who is saying what. And I asked them, by doing that, maybe there is some life risk. Then the respondents replied, no, I mean, we are ready to face the death for the truth. So sometimes you get such kind of respondents, but when the respondents gives their consent, I think it is okay for the researcher to mention their name in their research. Otherwise, the researcher must maintain the confidentiality, right? Participants must not be misled. Participant must not be deceived about the method and purpose of research. Participants must use overt or open method of discussion. However, in some situation, in some research, the overt method does not work. So it depends on the nature of research. Right. In some research, the researcher must ensure that participants uh, must not know the purpose, the methods of research. But in some research, it is, I mean, it is not problematic, it is unproblematic if the respondents are knowing the methods and purpose of research. So when it is unproblematic, I think it is 100% ethical for the researcher to disclose everything to the participant. Then the next ethical consideration is vulnerable group, right? Now there are different group in the society. Respondents are always at a risk. In that sense, all these, there is some vulnerability with all respondents. There are risk in all respondents. The researcher must ensure the safety of the respondents, I mean, safety of the all respondents. But among the respondents, you will find some vulnerable group, right? And you must take additional care of that vulnerable group because they are suppressed, they are depressed, uh, they had experienced a very bitter experience, right? So your research must not exploit them and must not expose any risk or danger to them, right? So when you are doing research on rape, you must be careful that your question to a rapist, I mean rape victim, should not exploit him or her, right? And your research must not expose any risk or danger or harm to them. Right. Suppose you are doing research on caste and you are interacting with caste victim, then you have to double careful about it. Next ethical consideration is ownership of data. Now, ownership of data is an important ethical issue. If data is yours, then you can do with that data according to your own wish. But the question is that the data you are collecting, is it your data? Are you free to use those data as per your wish? Certainly the answer is no. Because you have done your part, you collected your data, data are provided by the respondents. So you are not absolutely free to use your data. That is first. And second, if your research is externally funded, then the data is not yours. And if you use those data as per your wish, then you become unethical and illegal. So there are some, ethical consideration relating to ownership of the data. Then the next ethical consideration is the cultural, consideration. Now, most researcher do not include any discussion of diversity or cultural, differences, even though there is a growing body of evidence. Now, from my own experience, I also I have also seen it that the researcher, while conducting research and while explaining his field, knowledge from the field, the researcher generally do not say the opposite side of the narration that is in the field. The researcher present things as if in the field that one things every people say. The researchers do not say the divergence of opinion, the divergence of understanding. And this diverse understanding, diverse opinion reflects the cultural differences, the diversity or cultural differences of people. So, if the researcher is avoiding the diversity or the cultural differences, then the researcher becomes unethical. So, without considering the cultural diversity, the researcher cannot understand the response of the participants who belong to different culture, right? And secondly, why the the knowledge of cultural differences is important for the researcher. The knowledge of cultural differences is important for the researcher so that the researcher will understand who is saying what, when, and how. And secondly, the non-considering cultural diversity may lead the researcher to marginalize some participants belonging to distinct culture. Right. You have to include participants of different cultures in your research so that your research will be ethically correct from the cultural consideration point of view. Then the next, let me take 1 minute break. Okay, welcome. So the next, perhaps the last ethical consideration is the protection from harm for the researcher. In earlier I said protection from harm for respondents. Here for researcher. It's not that the researcher must ensure safety for the respondents. Even the researcher has the right to be safe while conducting research. The researcher should not put his life in danger. A researcher should not undertake his or her data collection anywhere where there is danger to his or her life. Right. So even if the field is appealing, the field is asking that your research, the authenticity of your research depends on that field. But if that field there is a life risk, then the researcher should not undertake that research. Life is more important than research. A researcher must not travel alone in night in his or her field what is unknown to him or her, because when the researcher enters in the field, then the researcher does not know all, but his or her field knows that researcher, and every field you can find the thesis and antithesis. So the researcher may be the target of either thesis or antithesis. Then the next, the researcher must ensure that someone knows you, where you are, what you are doing, when you should return from the field. So basically, I mean, if anything will happen to you in the field, then the knowledge of your presence, the knowledge of your action, the knowledge of your program must be known to someone so that you become more secure. So these are some of the ethical consideration, and these ethical consideration what have been raised should not be avoided by the researcher. Rather, the researcher can use these ethical consideration so that in his research so that his research becomes good quality. A researcher can have a quality research. So these ethical considerations, the researcher should not think that the ethical consideration is there to limit, you know, his freedom in doing research. Rather, researcher's freedom in doing research is less important than the authenticity of the research. Right. All these ethical considerations are maintained or are designed so that the research will be beneficial for the society. So this is all about your research ethics or ethical consideration in research. You follow any textbook and you may find some additional information, but certainly these information will help you to get a clarification how research ethics is very important. So there are some ethical guidelines, right? And what are these ethical guidelines? That every research should be designed, reviewed, and undertaken to ensure the integrity and quality. So, the integrity of research, the quality of research is very important. So, a researcher should design, should review, should undertake the research in order to maintain the integrity and quality of research. That is the first guideline. And second guideline, research staffs and subject must be fully informed about the purpose, method, and possible use of research. Right. So those who are involved with your research, either they are the research assistant or they are participants, they must be informed. I mean, you should not follow any secrecy with them. Then the confidentiality of information supplied by subject and their confidentiality must be respected. At least you should not disclose their name. Participants must not be forced or harmed. Independence of the research must be maintained and conflict of interest must be avoided. So these are some of the broad ethical guidelines. I think all these ethical guidelines we have discussed while going through the important you know ethical consideration, the important consideration when thinking about the research ethics. So the points what we have discussed: informed consent, power relationship, protection from harm for participant, vulnerable group, ownership of data, cultural consideration, and protection from harm for the researcher. So hope that uh, this lecture you will find it helpful for you, you know, to become a researcher and to understand the ethical consideration in research. So thank you. Thank you very much.